Recently, I've talked about movies that I think have a critic score on Rotten Tomatoes that's too low. In this case, I'm going to talk about something that's the opposite. A movie that I think has a critic score on Rotten Tomatoes that's too high. I'm talking about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull here. This fourth Indiana Jones film famously has a 80% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, but the audience score is much lower, and it's not a film that has aged well because its reputation over the years has not been good. And I really think Crystal Skull just misses the mark on what we want to see from an Indiana Jones film. When you get into the third act, you're in the forest, you have this machine that's just chopping down trees. Shia LaBeouf's character Mutt is swinging with the monkeys and having a dual sword fight with the main bad guy. And then you have the opening scene with the gophers in it. That's not what I want from Indiana Jones. All this green screen CGI. By the time you get to the third act, I'm like, it seems like I'm watching a video game here or a cartoon. This doesn't look real. It doesn't look convincing. It completely shatters my immersion, my suspension of disbelief, because it looks fake. I think the CGI in this movie is really not aged well. Then I think the scene where Indy survives a nuclear blast by being in a fridge may or may not be scientifically accurate, but regardless of whether it is or not, to me, the movie's just getting ridiculous and over the top. Also, while there were supernatural elements in all the previous Indiana Jones films, in Raiders and Last Crusade, you have a religious artifact that's connected to Christianity, and then in Temple of Doom, you have Indy being forced to drink this black liquid that turns him into a zombie through some kind of dark magic. There's infamously the scene where a guy gets his heart ripped out. But I think going from having some kind of supernatural element in there to Crystal Skull, where you flat out have aliens and even a UFO by the end, I think you've jumped the shark. You've just gone too far where it's just getting ridiculous. Also, Crystal Skull, it feels to me like this is an Indiana Jones film that lacks any kind of teeth, any kind of bite to it, any kind of edge. What I mean by that is, if you go back and watch the first three Indiana Jones films, of course, Temple of Doom is noticeably darker than the other two films, but none of them are particularly family friendly. I mean, Indy shoots a lot of people in those films, and you think about Indy's relationship with Marion, there are problems there. Whereas with Crystal Skull, yeah, there are some characters that die, but in the first three films, there was blood, and then in Crystal Skull, when someone dies, there's pretty much no blood. Also, think about the opening of the movie. You have all these Russians shooting American soldiers, but the movie cuts away, so you don't see any of that happening. And then there are some natives basically that get killed, but there's pretty much no blood on them. They look perfectly fine. The movie just shows in the background basically that some natives died. Then, at the end of the movie, some bad guys fall into the water, certainly to their deaths, but that's kind of in the background. It feels to me like a bunch of focus groups went in there and said, hey, we gotta make this Indiana Jones film more family friendly. I think by doing that, they miss the point of what people want to see in an Indiana Jones film, because it makes this movie feel very tame to me, very safe. Like it's scared of showing violence on screen, so it either cuts away before we see anything, or a character dies kind of on screen, but it feels indirect. Feels like there's no teeth to it, no bite. That's not what I want from an Indiana Jones film. Also, I think even by Crystal Skull, you were starting to run into the problem of Harrison Ford just getting a bit too old to really be Indiana Jones. As I talked about with Dial of Destiny, a big part of the appeal has always been the escapist fantasy of Indiana Jones, that he's the guy that we all want to be. But when Indy's starting to look a bit too old, you lose that magic, you lose the escapist fantasy. So overall, I think critics really miss the mark with Crystal Skull, because pretty much everyone has agreed that This was a major step down from the first three movies. I think it really misses what audiences want to see from an Indiana Jones film.